The Enchantress Returns, Chapter 12, A Not So Charming Evening. The twins left with Froggy and Red shortly after receiving the letter about the happily ever after assembly. The four of them rode in one carriage while all of Red's necessary luggage was carried in a separate carriage behind them. The twins felt sorry for the horses pulling the second carriage. It seemed like a heavy heave. They had half a dozen soldiers surrounding them as they traveled, which Froggy insisted was the perfect amount for safety, but not enough to cause any unwanted attention. Halfway there, they came to a stop so Red could change into the enormous gown their scheme required. They pulled into a tiny field between two large oak trees, and Red transformed the first carriage into a dressing room. She kicked Connor and Froggy out and made Alex stay inside to help her dress. It was definitely a challenge, as the gown was much bigger than the inside of the carriage. "I'd just like to point out that the Queen Snow White never has had a change on the side of the road," Red said, struggling to pull the heavy dress over her head. "I suppose that's what I get for being an elected queen." "It must be some consolation to know you were wanted," Alex said, trying to help Red move through the dress. "They actually chose you to lead their kingdom. It wasn't just handed to you." "Not really," Red said. "After the CRAWL revolution, it was between me and the third little pig, and he didn't even want the job. He was a total recluse. He barely came out of that brick house he was so proud of." And with the last effort, Red pushed herself up through the center of the gown. "There we go," she said, out of breath. The boys rejoined them inside the carriage, and the procession continued to the charming palace. There was physically no room for anything else inside the carriage with the four bodies, and the mound of endless red fabric crammed inside. "Oh no," Red said after they had been on the move for less than 5 minutes. "What is it?" Connor asked with his face pressed against the window. "Now I have to tinkle," Red peeped. Everyone else in the carriage groaned. The following evening, Queen Red's party arrived at the charming palace. The twins couldn't resist ogling at all the storybook estates and villages they passed on the way to the palace's front steps. Something seemed different about the charming kingdom, though the twins couldn't put their finger on it. Even beyond the lack of villagers parading through the streets and trading in the shops, there was a very gloomy vibe that floated through the whole kingdom. The carriages rolled up to the bottom of the lengthy staircase leading up to the palace's entrance, and the twins were relieved to finally be getting out of the compact carriage. They didn't care how crammed they would be under Red's dress. They were greeted by a palace footman. Froggy immediately jumped out of the carriage and busied him with unloading the luggage in the second carriage. The twins hopped out of the carriage and crouched on the ground. Red was next to the hop-out and landed directly in the middle of them. Her gown exploded out of the carriage and securely covered the twins below it. It was perfect. "So far, so good," Alex whispered under Red's dress. "Nice bloomers, Red," Connor said, chuckling about the knee-length undershorts that had strategically put on. Red grunted and kneed Alex in the head. "Ouch, that was me, Red," Alex said. "Apologies," Red said, and then kneed Connor in the head. "Ouch!" Connor yelled. Froggy walked back to find Red and the twins perfectly in position. "Are we ready for this?" Froggy asked. "I think so," Alex said. "Roger, Roger," Connor said. "That's reassuring," Froggy said, and he used a handkerchief to wipe the beads of sweat on his forehead. "Because I most certainly am not." "Take a chill pill, Frog," Connor said. "No one is going to know we're under here." The footman glanced over suspiciously from the second carriage, positive he had just heard voices come from bodies that weren't visible. "Make sure you two stay as silent as possible under there," Froggy said and gulped so hard he croaked. "Let's make our way into the palace." "Shall we?" Red took a step forward the twins weren't ready for. "Red, we can't see anything. You're going to have to guide us," Connor whispered at her. "And how am I supposed to do that?" Red whispered down at them. "Narrate what you're doing," Alex said. Red closed her eyes and took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for the evening she was in for. "Fine. I'm walking towards the stairs," Red informed them, and they moved with her. She was walking too fast for them to keep up. "Take baby steps," Connor whispered. "We're crouched down here like chimpanzees." Red's nostrils flared. "Sure," she said sharply. "Now I'm walking slowly up the stairs." The first few steps were a disaster. Froggy kept gasping every time he saw one of their sneakers peeking out from under the gown. Slowly but surely they managed to get the hang of it, and smoothly made their way up to the enormous flight of steps. Back at the carriages, the footman could have sworn he saw 3 pairs of feet under Red's dress out of the corner of his eyes, but when he double-checked, they were gone. The footman continued unloading the second carriage, deciding he just needed glasses or to retire. Alex and Connor's backs were starting to ache from crawling up the steps like monkeys, but it only got worse when they reached the top of the stairs and the ground became flat, causing them to slouch even more. "And now I'm walking towards the palace entrance. No more steps," Red said out loud. A few of the charming kingdom guards patrolling the entrance looked at her funny. After all, she was walking at a snail's pace and talking to herself. "You certainly are," Froggy said to Red, and patted her back, trying to reduce the awkwardness. "Prince Charlie, welcome back, sir," the twins heard a familiar voice. "Sir Lambton," Froggy clarified for them. "Good to see you, although I wish the visit were for a different occasion." Alex and Connor tensed up, knowing Sir Lambton was just a few feet away from them. They held their breath, afraid he'd hear even that. "Now I'm walking inside the charming palace," Red said to the twins, but was caught by Sir Lambton. And I can't believe it. Feels like I was just home just a minute ago. Such a quick trip." It was a decent cover, but from under the gown the twins could feel the suspicious gaze Lambton was giving Red. "Are you feeling all right, Your Majesty?" Lambton asked her. "You're walking so slowly. Are you ill?" Alex and Connor exchanged a glance, wondering how Red was going to cover up this one. "Perfectly fine, Sir Lambton," Red said. "I just selected the wrong pair of shoes to travel in. My feet are killing me." Alex and Connor sighed with relief. Connor gave Red a thank you pat on the knee. She quickly slapped his head through the gown, and Connor bit his fist to silence a scream. "Just an itch," Red said with a tight smile. "How are things here?" Froggy asked, trying to distract Lambton. "Terrible," he said. "Have you not heard?" "I'm guessing not," Froggy said. "What happened?" Lambton let out the most troubled sigh the twins had ever heard. "Princess Hope was kidnapped last night." The twins gasped, unable to contain their shock, but it was covered by the gasps coming from Red and Froggy. "What?" Froggy said, devastated by the news about his only niece. "What do you mean kidnapped? By whom?" "Rumpelstiltskin," Sir Lambton said. "It looks like he's been working for the Enchantress again. Only this time he succeeded." It grew quiet. The whole world seemed to be falling apart for everyone. A few moments later, after traveling across the red-carpeted interior of the charming palace's entrance hall, the twins knew they had arrived inside the ballroom, recognizing the golden dance floor beneath them. The room was filled with troubled voices and impatient footsteps milling about. "Here, Your Majesty, please have a seat," the twins heard Sir Lambton say. "Thank you," Red said. "I'm now going to slowly sit on the stool I've so graciously been provided with." The twins cringed from the inelegance of Red's statement, but thankfully everyone else in the room was too occupied to have even noticed Red and Froggy enter the room. She slowly sat on the stool placed behind her, giving the twins enough time to adjust themselves to her seated position. Sitting on the floor beside her was a relief to all their joints. The twins could hear small conversations from all corners of the room. They wished they could put faces to the voices they heard. Connor nudged Alex and quietly gestured to a loose seam he'd found in Red's dress. He carefully pulled the seam apart even more and created a small hole to peek out of. Alex did the same on her side, and they were finally able to see outside the gown. Although they knew everyone in the room, there was so much heartache and hopelessness worn on all the faces. The kings and queens were almost unrecognizable. It was hard for the twins to see them all like this. Their lives had always been perfect examples of happiness. But here they were now, the most distraught group of people they'd ever seen. Queen Cinderella was seated on her throne, devastated beyond belief. Her hands covered her swollen eyes as tears rolled down her face. She was comforted by Queen Snow White and Queen Rapunzel, who used the tip of her remarkably long braid to dry Cinderella's tears. The man paced around in the corner of the ballroom. King Chance never stopped moving, furious that his daughter had been taken from him. King Chandler and Rapunzel's husband stood near him, unable to do anything but watch. Froggy joined them, lending his support with his presence. "Last night I heard her crying," Cinderella told the woman at her throne. "I got out of bed and went to her room. A few of the maids were on their way inside, and I insisted on checking on her myself. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw were the curtains blowing inside. I thought it was strange. I didn't remember leaving her window open. And that's when I saw him, that horrid little man holding my daughter. Heavy streams of tears flowed down the queen's face. Rapunzel rubbed her back, and Snow White held her hand tightly. "Breathe, Cinderella, breathe," Snow White told her. Cinderella caught her breath and continued. "Then he looked me right in the eye and hopped out of the window. I screamed and ran to the windowsill, trying to see if I could see them below, but they were gone," she said. "That disgusting man disappeared with my baby." Snow White held her, and she cried into her shoulder. "This is all my fault," said a soft voice across the room. Queen Sleeping Beauty stood at the window in the back of the ballroom, listlessly staring at the land outside. "I'm the one she wants. I'm the one she's after," Sleeping Beauty said in a daze. "Why doesn't she just take me? Why does she have to make everyone else suffer?" "This isn't your fault," Rapunzel said. "You can't blame yourself for this," Snow White agreed. King Chance grew tired of pacing and groaned angrily. He needed someone to blame. "Where are those useless fairies?" he demanded. "And why haven't they done anything or something about this yet?" A soft breeze blew through the ballroom, and twinkling lights of all colors of the rainbow floated through the room. The fairy council slowly appeared out of thin air. Esmeralda was first to appear. "We're doing everything in our power," she said. She was tall, black, and beautiful. She wore a long emerald gown that matched her eyes and jewelry. Esmeralda always had a soft but authoritative presence. She was someone you could trust but never wanted to cross. Santos was next to her right and was followed by Skyline, the blue fairy. She had pale skin, hair the color of sky, and robes the color of the ocean. Tangerina appeared shortly after her. She was the orange fairy, and actual bees flew around her beehive. Violetta, the purple fairy and oldest of the council, popped up close to where Red and the twins were seating. Rosetta, the short, plump, and rosy-cheeked red fairy, appeared next. Coral, the youngest and the pink fairy, showed up shortly after that, hovering in the air thanks to her tiny wings. The fairies' colorful arrivals were a beautiful sight, but not beautiful enough to raise the spirits in the room. "Well, it's not enough," Chance yelled at them. "This Enchantress is one of you, isn't she? You outnumber her. Why can't you handle this?" "We are greater than her in size, but not in strength," said Skyline in her dreamlike voice. "She's managed to grow more powerful than we ever imagined," Xantho said. "I'm afraid even the Fairy Godmother is no match for her." "Speaking of the Fairy Godmother, has she or Mother Goose arrived yet?" Esmeralda asked, looking around the ballroom. "We need to begin." Another soft breeze blew through the room, this time carrying white sparkling lights that circled into a vortex in the center of the room. A moment later, the twins' grandmother appeared with her crystal wand raised. The twins looked nervously at each other. Now that their grandmother was here, they were officially in the same room as everyone they wanted to avoid. "Forgive me for being late," the fairy godmother said, and politely acknowledged everyone in the room with a comforting nod. "There was a bit of an issue in the other world." The twins had never heard their world refer to anything else but home before. It was odd to hear it have a name of its own. Although not entirely surprising, what else had the fairies been calling it this entire time? "Red Riding Hood, my word! That is quite a dress you're wearing," the fairy godmother said when she saw Red sitting in the oversized gown. Alex and Connor could hear each other's heartbeats and were terrified they were about to be discovered. "Well," Red said nervously, thinking as quickly as possible, "it's important to dress your best when the world is at its worst, to raise morale." "Yes, I suppose that is true," the fairy godmother said, though she didn't sound fully convinced. "With all due respect, I don't believe this is the proper time to be talking about dresses in the other world," King Chance said, his frustration building every second spent without his daughter. "Will Mother Goose be joining us?" Esmeralda asked, getting to the meeting back on track. The twins' grandmother dropped the subject of Red's dress. "No, she stayed behind in the other world," she said. "My grandchildren are missing, so she agreed to continue searching for them while we have our discussion." "That's horrible," Red said, shaking her head a tad too much. "I hope they're all right. I just love those two so much." Alex and Connor shared a mutual eye roll. "Is everyone else here?" the fairy godmother asked, still eyeing Red strangely. "Everyone but the elves, ma'am," Sir Lambton informed her from the side of the room. "We sent word of our meeting to the Elf Empire, but they have chosen to miss it, feeling the current situation has nothing to do with them." King Chandler sighed. "Typical," he said. "The elves never get involved unless they have to." "Thank you, Sir Lambton," the fairy godmother said. "Then let's begin." King Chan stormed up to her. "Tell us why the Enchantress can't be stopped. Why are all of you so incompetent?" he shouted. The fairy godmother looked at him with her trademark compassion. "Chance, I'm afraid I don't have your answers. Esmia is just as big a mystery to me as she is to all of you." "Then tell us what you know," Chance ordered. "Where did this monster come from? What is she after now?" Sleeping Beauty took a step toward the fairy godmother. "I'm willing to give myself up to her if that's what she's after," she said. "My dear, you are not responsible for any of this," the fairy godmother said. "I'm afraid I'm the only one who is entirely to blame. Ezmia wouldn't be here if it weren't for me." All the fairies lowered their heads, knowing the fairy godmother was telling the truth. What do you mean, fairy godmother?" Cinderella asked. "Surely someone like you couldn't be accountable for a creature like that?" The fairy godmother closed her eyes and took a deep breath, deciding where to begin. There was so much to tell, and not enough time to tell it. "It all started centuries ago, on one of my first visits to the other world," the fairy godmother explained. "It was a horrible time for the world. There was a plague and war everywhere you looked. Today, they refer to that period as the Dark Ages, and there couldn't be a better description. Sometimes the air would be filled with so much smoke from all the destruction, the sun would be hidden for days at a time. I discovered a little girl alone in the middle of the forest, no more than 5 years old. She was crying and was covered in ash and dirt. She told me that her name was Esmia and that she had lived in a village nearby. Like many of the villages at the time, hers had been invaded by a group of barbaric soldiers. They swept through the village and killed everyone in their path, including her family. The soldiers discovered Ezmia hiding in a barn. However, when they tried harming her, the girl was able to defend herself using magic. She told me she had started a giant fire with just her hands and that it consumed her entire village and all the soldiers with it. The girl took me to her village so I could see the damage for myself, and it was devastating. Not only had the villagers perished, but all the land around the town for acres was destroyed. I knew that this girl was no ordinary child. Magic had always been a mysterious thing, but I'm absolutely astonished that a child in the middle of another dimension could have such capabilities. But for whatever reason, magic had found this girl and saved her life, and I believe my discovering her was no accident. I don't think she would survive the other world on her own, so I brought her back to our world. I knew she was special because when we arrived in the fairy kingdom, the unicorns bowed," the fairy godmother said. Connor looked at his sister. The unicorns had bowed to them when they first arrived to the fairy kingdom. What did it mean? "Esmia was raised there," the fairy godmother continued. "We taught her how to use her magic, and she became a fairy. Her powers grew with time, and she proved herself to be one of the most gifted fairies the fairy kingdom had ever seen. Esmia was almost the kindest, most honest, loving young woman I'd ever known. She was so thankful I'd brought her to live in our world and received so much joy from helping others. I loved her like a daughter, and she became my apprentice. I was certain when my time came to an end I could leave this world safely in her hands. I was positive she would be the next fairy godmother. We created the happily ever after assembly in hopes that Esmia would lead it someday. But as Esmia grew into adulthood, she changed. Things were going on beyond our knowledge, things we couldn't see. She became another person altogether. She became aggressive and mean-spirited. Her interest in fairy life faded completely. Helping people became a chore for her, and she started abusing her magic. It was during our first official meeting at the Happily Ever After Assembly that I knew Esmia was no longer the little girl I saved in the other world. We hadn't officially appointed a leader of the assembly yet, so I was presiding. The trolls and goblins had just been sanctioned to their own territory, but they were enslaving innocent people from other kingdoms. I asked the rest of the assembly what the best solution was. Esmia blurted out, "Why don't we just drown them all? The Melina stream practically runs through their territory. Just break a dam and be done with them. We can make it look like an accident." She seemed almost amused by this idea. Naturally, after an outburst like that, we couldn't appoint her head of the assembly as planned. We appointed Emeralda and the Fairy Council instead. When Ezmia found out she had been replaced, she was enraged. She went on a tirade, disassociating herself from the assembly and the fairy kingdom altogether. She changed her entire appearance and refused to be known as a fairy, deeming herself an enchantress instead. The next time we crossed paths with Esmia was at the Sleeping Beauty's christening. She was uninvited, but we knew she would come anyways. We discovered Rumpelstiltskin had been working for her when he tried kidnapping Sleeping Beauty, and we confronted her about it. Esmia lost control and went on a rampage, cursing the princess to die after pricking her finger on a spindle of a spinning wheel. However, I knew that the curse wasn't only going to affect Sleeping Beauty. Esmia's powers were too strong for the amount of rage to be aimed at just an innocent child. Luckily, I was able to convert the curse into a harmless sleeping spell. And when she pricked her finger on a spinning wheel as planned, the entire kingdom was affected, confirming my suspicions. Esmia disappeared after the christening, and we never saw her again. We searched everywhere but found no trace of her. Later, word reached us that she had been poisoned by the same toxins that left the Upper Eastern Kingdom bare. We figured she must have died and stopped our search. Unfortunately, we were wrong. A year ago, my grandchildren accidentally found a way into this world and went missing. While I was searching for them, I made a troubling discovery. A small weed started to grow in the northeast where the flowers and grass had grown. The land had revived itself from the poison, except the poison had obliterated everything good that had come from the soil, and the weeds had taken its place. I knew then it would only be a matter of time before Esmia resurfaced. I alerted the Fairy Council, and once we spent the last year actively searching for her, but found nothing to lead us in the right direction. It wasn't until her recent attack on the Eastern Kingdom that they were positive she had returned. The crowd in the ballroom was even tenser after hearing Esmia's story. "And why can't we stop her now?" King Chance demanded. "If her spells could be converted back then, why can't we get a grip on them anymore?" "That's what I'm trying to tell you," the Fairy Godmother said. "We taught her everything she knows. We taught her how to use magic from her heart. We had trained her to channel from a good source. That's why every spell she's ever cast could be altered. But when she was poisoned, anything good that was left in her soul was killed. Now Esmia's powers come from a place of darkness and anger, forces that we fairies don't stand a chance against. And believe me, Esmia has a lot of anger to feed off of." Alex and Connor couldn't believe what she was saying. Was their grandmother insinuating that the Enchantress was unstoppable? "So, what are we going to do?" Snow White asked. The Fairy Godmother lowered her eyes and looked down at the floor, hating to say it as much as they hated hearing it. "I don't know," she said softly. And with that, whatever hope had survived was obliterated. It was as if the Fairy Godmother had told them the world was over. Suddenly, all the windows burst open, and a monstrous wind blew inside the ballroom, knocking Sleeping Beauty to the ground. A gigantic bolt of lightning hit the floor so hard that the entire palace buckled, and in its building flash, the Enchantress appeared. She was the most majestic person the twins had ever seen. Her hair and cape flowed through the ballroom, and although her mouth was still, her eyes smiled evilly through her long lashes. "Hope I'm not late," Esmia said. "I do love a good story, especially when it's mine." Alex and Connor clutched onto each other under Red's dress. Everyone in the room was frozen in fear. "Don't tell me you're having another party without inviting me," Esmia said, glaring at all the royals and fairies around her. "You think you'd learn your lesson from the last time you didn't include me." A smirk appeared on her face. Cinderella was the only person to move. She jumped out of her throne and ran straight towards the Enchantress with fists raised. King, Chandler, and Froggy were quick to grab hold of her, but she lunged with such determination, Rapunzel's husband had to join them in holding her back. "You horrible witch!" Cinderella screamed, struggling against her brother-in-law. "Magic or no magic, I'll pull you apart limb from limb if you hurt my daughter." Esmia just laughed at her. "What have you done with our daughter, you monster?" Chance yelled. Esmeralda and Skylene placed their hands on his shoulders to keep him from charging toward her. "She's alive. For now," Esmia said, and casually examined her nails. "I hope there's no hard feelings. I'll give her back to you once I'm done with her. Maybe." "What do you want with Princess Hope, Ezmia?" the fairy godmother demanded. Esmia squinted at the fairy godmother and walked in a circle around her, closely examining her former teacher. "Why, if it isn't the big FG herself," she said. "You're looking rather old, Grams. Is something on your mind? Is something troubling you?" "Don't be cheeky, Esmia. It's a shade you never wore well," the fairy godmother said. Esmia frowned at her playfully. "You're good at putting on a noble facade, but I know better," she said. "Have you told them what I took from you yet? Or have you left that part out of your story out because you were afraid they would worry more, knowing you're just as terrified as the rest of them?" The fairy godmother kept her silence, not giving in to Esmia's games. "Fine, I'll tell them," Esmia said, and faced the rest of the room. "I have her granddaughter." Everyone in the room gasped, including the twins. What was she talking about? Alex wondered. The fairy godmother looked puzzled as well, wondering if the Enchantress had managed to get a hold of Alex as well as Charlotte. "My granddaughter?" the fairy godmother asked. Esmia rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't look surprised," she said. "I took her weeks ago. You had to have known. I left you plenty of clues." The fairy godmother looked at Esmia with the most neutral face she could muster. "How did you get to her?" she asked. "It was simple, as most things are for me," Ezmia said with a small shrug. "I stole that book of yours, the old one with all our history in it, the portal. I cast a tiny spell on it, and it was able to pluck her straight out of the other world. I said, 'Bring me the Bailey girl from the place where the fairy godmother's precious Bailey family resides,' and that was all. Stupid woman, she didn't even pretend to be someone else. She told me exactly who she was right from the beginning." Alex grabbed Connor's hand and they locked eyes. "She thinks Mom is me," Alex whispered to her brother. "And Mom must be going along with it," Connor whispered back. "But why was she taken instead of you?" Alex clutched Connor's shoulder as the answer came to her. "Connor, I was in my honors class when Mom went missing. I was in the next town. I wasn't in the place where we reside. That's why she got Mom instead." The fairy godmother began nodding her head, coming to the same conclusion as the twins. She looked over to Red and stared down at her huge gown again. The twins could have sworn she was looking straight at them. Did she know they were under there? Whatever she did or didn't know, it made the fairy godmother stand a little taller, knowing the Enchantress had made a grave mistake. "I'll admit you have our attention now," the fairy godmother said, quickly looking back to Esmia. "Now, what is it that you want from us? Why have you graced us with your presence tonight?" A menacing smile grew on the Enchantress's face. This was the part she had been waiting 2 centuries to tell them. "As you may have guessed, I have decided to take over the world," Esmia said matter-of-factly with a small yawn. "But rather than continuing to show you examples of my powerful wrath, I've decided to give you an opportunity that will make all our lives easier. I will want you all to renounce your thrones and hand your kingdoms over to me willingly." The entire room erupted in outrage. The men had to restrain Cinderella once again. "Never!" Chance shouted, speaking for everyone in the room. "Even with an entire kingdom consumed and a young princess's life at stake, there is still some hesitation," Esmia said, shaking her head. "I'm going to take over. It's unpreventable. I'm going to give you a chance to accept your defeat. With dignity, you'd be wise to take it." No one moved or made a sound under Esmia's heavy glare. She turned to Sleeping Beauty, who was still on the floor, trembling under the Enchantress's gaze. "Why don't you do it first, Sleeping Beauty?" Esmia said. "Show your fellow rulers how easy it is. Your kingdom has been through enough already. Wouldn't you agree? Ease their sufferings. Do it for your people, for your husband. If you hand over me your kingdom, I'll release it from my enchanted plants. Do we have a deal?" All was quiet while Sleeping Beauty contemplated the impossible decision. Snow White and Rapunzel shook her head, urging her to not give in. Finally, Sleeping Beauty stood up and slowly walked over to stand beside the fairy godmother. "Any partnership I make will be made against you," Sleeping Beauty said, "and my people would expect nothing less." All the monarchs and fairies looked to one another, inspired by Sleeping Beauty's bravery. One by one they walked across the ballroom and stood behind the fairy godmother, showing the enchantress where their loyalties would remain. Esmia was beside herself with rage. The twins were positive they could see flames flickering from her eyes. "You're all making the greatest mistake of your reigns," she said. "But don't worry, they'll be ending soon." The fairy godmother took a few confident steps towards Ezmia. "No one in this room may be able to stop you, Ezmia," the fairy godmother said, and then glanced in the twins' direction. "But I have nothing but the highest confidence someone, unrevealed, will find a way." Alex and Connor looked at each other. Her words were so carefully chosen. Was she talking about them? Esmia's anger turned to amusement, and she let out a long laugh. "I see," she said. "You all think you're safe standing behind your precious fairy godmother. Well, in case you think her promising words alone can save you, allow me to clarify." Esmia reached an open hand towards the fairy godmother, and a gigantic bolt of lightning erupted from it. It hit the fairy godmother, and she disappeared. A turquoise jar appeared in the enchantress's hand, and a ghostly version of the fairy godmother appeared inside of it. "What will the rest of you do now that I have the fairy godmother's soul?" Esmia asked the room. Alex and Connor squirmed frantically around in Red's gown. Alex had to hold her brother back as he tried running towards the enchantress like Cinderella. "She's got Grandma," Connor whispered, begging his sister to let him go. "She's got Grandma." "She can't know we're here, Connor," Alex whispered back to him. "Consider this my final warning," Esmia declared to the crowd. "My attacks on your kingdom will continue until you surrender to me. We'll see where you stand when all of your people are begging you to make the suffering end. Your days of happily ever after are over." Another gigantic bolt of lightning hit the palace, and the enchantress disappeared, taking the fairy godmother with her. Everyone in the room was as pale as Snow White. The twins froze inside Red's gown with their hearts broken. No one knew what to do. All the king, queens, and fairies searched for some sign of optimism in one another's eyes, but there was none to be found. For the first time in history, the leaders of the fairy tale world were helpless.